Doing those midnight shifts, security, so when I went for a surf in the morning, I remember it being super foggy and one of those days where you think maybe I won't go out. But I had the music in my head, the instrumental, and just kind of wrote it, and then I was still wet when I...
March 16th, 1992. Pearl Jam was very happy. 10. Getting ready for their famous MTV Unplugged show while riding high on the success of their first album. Eddie Vedder was having a meltdown backstage at Sony Music Studios in New York, though, and Pearl Jam almost broke up before they even started. Longtime fans will be shocked by what happened in those crucial hours before one of their most famous shows. Eddie's temper tantrum wasn't caused by stage fear or a lack of ideas. It was about how crushing it was to become famous all of a sudden and have to represent an age. He was also writing about how scared he was that he was losing himself in the process. His admission that he almost quit Pearl Jam that night shows the bad side of being a rock star and the moment when one of rock's most honest voices almost went silent forever. The truth about Eddie's problem behind the scenes shows what it's like to become an unwilling icon. You, the quick-fire star of instant fame. Eddie Vedder felt overwhelmed and removed from the person he had been just a few months earlier by March 1992, when Pearl Jam had a meteoric rise. The band had gone from playing small clubs to stadiums that were packed to the brim, and Eddie was having a hard time adjusting to his new role as an unpopular Generation X spokesperson. Everyone was surprised by how well 10 did, but Eddie felt like each milestone took him further away from being himself. Critics were now analyzing the highly personal lyrics on the album, which were based on his own experiences with being abandoned and struggling with his identity. Millions of fans who saw him as their voice were loving them. The pressure got worse when Pearl Jam and Nirvana were named as the grunge movement's leaders. Eddie never wanted to be a spokesman for anything, but people kept asking him to explain not only his music, but also a whole trend in pop culture. Being the voice of a generation's anger and disappointment was breaking his spirit. The invitation to perform at MTV Unplugged was both a great chance and a scary task. Fans knew that millions of people would be watching their performance on the show, which had become a prestigious stage where jobs could make or break them. The acoustic format would take away the loudness and power that often hid his flaws, leaving him mentally bare in front of a huge crowd. Eddie was naturally shy, which made the constant attention even harder for him to handle. He had always been private and kept his feelings to himself, but his fame meant that he had to constantly connect with and be seen by the public. The clash between who he was as a person and what he did in public was causing him to have an existential crisis that could destroy him. The point of no return. Behind the scenes at MTV Unplugged, Eddie Vedder's worst emotional crisis happened in the hours before Pearl Jam's MTV Unplugged show. Years of stress finally got to him, and he couldn't handle it anymore. What happened behind the scenes that day showed how much he struggled with fame and how seriously he thought about quitting everything. Eddie had his first meltdown during afternoon rehearsals, when the truth of the show hit him hard. The small room and acoustic arrangements made every feeling more raw and open, which caused a fear that caught everyone off guard. In the end, he said, Eddie's doubts about not only the show, but also his whole part in Pearl Jam made the crisis worse. He told other members of the band that he was thinking about leaving the whole thing, feeling like the demands and pressure were too much to handle. The man who had become the voice of a whole generation was losing it. Mike McCready, Pearl Jam's bassist, saw Eddie's breakdown happen and later talked about it. Eddie was scared about more than just the show. Everything was making him wonder if he fit in the band, if he could handle the stress, and if any of it was worth it. Eddie's crisis was so bad that it shocked his friends. Eddie locked himself in a bathroom backstage and wouldn't come out or talk to anyone. That was the most telling sign. The future of Pearl Jam was in danger for almost an hour, while Eddie fought his problems alone. The band and crew were nervously waiting because they didn't know if the lead singer would show up ready to play or ready to quit. What I said that changed everything. Eddie Vedder's admission to his friends that he almost quit Pearl Jam showed how hard things were for him. That night was a big turning point in his life and the future of the band. His honest admission of his worries and questions led to a moment of truth that changed the way Pearl Jam did business going forward. Eddie's admittance that he had been planning his escape for weeks was the most shocking part of his confession. He told them, "I knew everything. I was going to leave after the tour was over. I believed that the band might do better without me." This comment showed how seriously he had thought about giving up on everything. It broke my heart and opened my eyes when Eddie talked about his fears. He talked about how he felt like a fake and not deserving of all the love and attention he was getting. Others envied his success, but it felt like a burden to him, and he was afraid of letting down the fans who had put so much emotion into his songs. The most telling part of his statement was about how he felt about the music. Eddie said, "I was beginning to dislike the songs because of what they stood for. I felt like I was taking pleasure in someone else's pain every time we played Alive or Jeremy." His love for music was dying because of this gap between his work and his feelings. The way his bandmate responded to this statement was very important in keeping him from leaving. They didn't brush off his worries or try to talk him out of his feelings. Instead, they listened and understood how he felt. Eddie's recovery and his choice to stay with Pearl Jam were both based on this network of support. Would Pearl Jam have been able to stay together if Eddie had quit as planned? The band's following success and longevity shows that his choice to stay was important not only for his own artistic growth, but also for the alternative rock and grunge movement as a whole. The act that kept his job. Eddie Vedder had a meltdown backstage, and the MTV Unplugged performance that followed was one of the most moving and real acts in the show's history. Eddie's crisis turned into a moment of artistic triumph and emotional breakthrough because of what happened on that stage. When Eddie finally took the stage, everyone could see how emotionally weak he was. He didn't try to hide his problems. Instead, he used them in his act, giving it a raw honesty that hit home with the crowd. The stress of his recent problem was clear in his words, adding more meaning and power to every song. Eddie's rescue came from the acoustic style that had scared him at first. Because the music didn't have the power or volume to hide his feelings, he had to face them straight through it. Because he was so open, he gave some of the most moving performances of his career, especially in Black and Alive. The most memorable part of the show was when Eddie sang Alive. His emotional delivery turned the song from a survival anthem to a statement of rebirth. Every note showed that he was still committed to Pearl Jam, making for a performance that was both deeply personal and widely understandable. Eddie later said, "That night made me remember that the music was bigger than my fears. Not the pressure or the expectations, but the connection with the crowd and the power of the songs were what counted." This understanding set him on the path to continued success with Pearl Jam. What happened and what was learned that will last. Eddie Vedder's rage backstage and almost leaving Pearl Jam was a turning point that changed not only his approach to fame, but also the band's whole view on success and being true to yourself. The lessons they learned from that crisis still affect the choices they make about their careers decades later. Pearl Jam's approach to fame and business success was the most important thing that changed after Eddie's problem. The band chose not to make music videos for a few years and limited their media appearances to stay away from the trappings of celebrity society. We learned we didn't have to sell our souls to be successful, as Eddie explained. Eddie's experience also changed how the band dealt with the stress of traveling and recording in big ways. Support methods and communication plans were put in place. Make sure that no one else in the band has to deal with such pressure and isolation ever again. This way of working together became a signature of Pearl Jam's long career. Eddie's songwriting changed because of the crisis as well. He wrote more honest and introspective songs about the problems that come with fame and success. His ongoing journey to stay true to himself while working in the music business was shown in songs like Dissident and later I Am Mine. Eddie was right to stay with the band after this problem because they had a lot of success with their music and finances in the years that followed. Eddie showed that being real and making a lot of money could go together. He is thought to be worth $100 million and has a catalog of important albums. Eddie's Meltdown Backstage was a turning point for Pearl Jam when they chose sincerity over easy success. This set them apart from many of their peers and ensured their long-term importance in rock music. What do you think about Eddie being honest about how hard it is for him to be famous? Just write your thoughts in the box below. Please like this movie, subscribe, and click the bell to get more interesting stories from rock music. Thanks for seeing.